So I'm actually just coming off of our annual auto sales meeting that I've been in Chicago for the past week. Got to hang out with Sam Diark, COO of Ziegler Automotive, so that was very entertaining. And hopefully y'all are ready and willing to sit through a lot of numbers for the next 45 minutes. Okay, so we're gonna really just cover what we're seeing happening in the auto industry. I have just completed my 74th quarterly update on the state of the automotive industry. So I've been doing this since 2007, so it's a very long time. And we're gonna really cover just what we're seeing happening in the auto finance industry. So it's really, really interesting these days. So all of the data I'm going to cover, this is all experience-sourced information. It's like registration, title data. We look at what's happening in the credit bureau for lenders reporting, on the trade lines, looking at delinquency and stuff. But I'm going to cover a lot of information in the next 45 minutes. Hopefully, should have time for questions and everything. And I'm going to kind of cover the main things you're seeing on the screen. So we're going to hit some overall origination trends, look at what's happening with new vehicle financing. Always got to talk about EVs because the EV market, of course, is just very, very interesting these days. Then we're going to look specifically at used vehicles. Of course, leasing is going to be tied into all of this. And then we'll wrap up with delinquency because I always like adding, ending on that positive note of delinquency. So let's take a look at what's happening in the auto finance space. So the last couple of months, sales definitely got pulled ahead, and everyone talked about like the last month's sales. I think we were anticipating a SARS of coming in anywhere from 15.6 to 16.4, but financing is actually not doing as well. So financing from a loan and lease standpoint, so far for retail, we're only up a little bit year over year, about 1.4%. And this is through January through June so far. So we're pulling ahead a little bit, but the volume is still relatively low. So hopefully we can get back to where we were eventually, like kind of those pre-COVID numbers when financing was actually doing very well. And one of the reasons for that is because we just increasingly see more cash in the marketplace. When the rates went up, it was kind of the exact opposite of what we expected to see. We really just started to see more cash come in. And so for new vehicles, you kind of see that on the upper left-hand side in the blue bar, percentage of new vehicles with financing, only about 80%. So we're seeing around 20% cash. Now, historically, we're like 13, 15% cash, but we've been 20% for the past couple years. We are at a record low of financing for used vehicles. So I mean, look at that. Only 37% of the nearly 40 million used vehicles that transact every single year have financing on it. Now, of course, leasing, very small percentage of that. Now, for Q2 of this year, leasing actually did drop. So the last couple quarters, we've been right around 25%. We fell down just below 24%, but we still have some good new inventory out there. Days supply is still relatively low. But right now, the average age of what's being financed has been coming down. Now, with those leasing figures, though, of course, one of the big impacts is off-lease returns. Not doing very well with off-lease returns right now. So this year, we expect to see only about 2.2 million retail off-lease returns. Pretty significant drop from last year. And when we get into the EV section, a lot of these are going to be EVs. We are going to have a huge volume of used EVs coming back starting later this year into next year. So keep in mind, the late model market is changing rather dramatically. Now, Q2 was very interesting. So this has been the year of the banks. When we look at what's being financed and who are the lenders out there doing the financing, so for the total financing, new, used, loan, leases, banks have come back and they've returned as the #1 lender type. Oh, if anyone, we're happy to provide a copy of the presentation so y'all can get copies. So banks are now about 27% of the share. The credit unions picking up a little bit more share. They're in that kind of, I don't know how the colors are translating, but they're in that purple bar. But the dark blue are the banks. So banks have really come back. But there are some nuances with these bank figures because you have changing relationships. You now have Chase doing Tesla. So a lot of the Tesla financing is pulled away from Santander. That's now going over to Chase. And you have Wells Fargo doing VW Audi. They're not doing Porsche, but they're doing VW Audi. So that's changed some of the relationships. Now, I also, though, visit a lot of banks. Every single bank I've met with so far this year is all talking about that they are getting aggressive again, whether it's loosening standards, buying deeper, or buying older. And they're all getting more aggressive. So they're definitely pulling back from, or pulling in and getting that market share again. So credit scores, of course, constantly increasing. This goes back to 2015. Average new credit score. It's a prime market, 757. Used scores continuing to increase, and there's a bit of a nuance here because everyone always asks, well, is it just consumers, or are there just fewer subprime consumers? And that's part of it. I mean, the median score in each tier has continued to increase. And I have a colleague of mine that did some work and basically was showing the percentage of consumers who completely pay off their credit card debt every single month. Honestly, it's like 30%. And it continues to increase. So just consumers are just increasingly improving their credit scores. There's more credit education out there. Consumers are monitoring their credit. I was at a conference probably about 6 months ago, and two gentlemen on the remarketing side of Toyota saw that I worked with Experian, and they immediately each pull out their phones and show me the Experian app. I don't even have the Experian app. And they said that they every single week have a competition to see who has the highest credit score. I'm like, that's just crazy. So anyway, and they were like, well, my score's higher than his now this week, haha. I'm like, well, all right. And if you have a perfect score, you're usually in a prison. So, institutions have some of the highest credit scores out there. I guess, you can't really, do much with that. So then when we start looking at the new car market, this is really where you see the market share gains from the banks. I mean, look at this. The banks increased last year from 26 to now 32%. If the captives weren't running incentives, the share didn't go to the captives. And all the captives were down. Like even captives like BMW, which typically has some of the highest penetration of the brand, like they do historically like 97% of the financing on Mini and like 92% of the financing on BMW, they're in the 80s right now. So even for BMW, which is historically very high. So all the captives have really lost a lot of share. The banks are picking it up. The credit unions have picked it up. But even the FinCos, the finance companies, also really significantly increasing market share. So also on the new side, of course, again, when we're looking for these payments, affordability. Okay, now we're starting to see some of the impacts of tariffs starting to come into these figures. So this is Q2. Average new loan amount, almost $42,000. Average monthly payment hit almost $750. Last month, anyone want to take a guess at what the payment hit last month? $770. Okay, so we're already at $770. We're already in the 43,000s, and we're not yet seeing the tariff impacts fully come in yet. They're coming, but it's really accelerating. So I was, up until Q2, like Q1, I was still pretty optimistic. I was like, we're finally not seeing these huge increases in payments, these huge increases in loan amounts. I'm not so optimistic anymore. So like quarter over quarter, we're about 2%, 2.5% year over year. Quarter over quarter, about 0.5%. But right now, last month, we're up another couple thousand. And it's well above what it should be. I was just spending some time with Jeremy Robb and Jonathan Smoke over at Cox Automotive, and they were saying the 26 model year releases are inflated a little bit higher than what they should have been based on what last year's 25 introductions were. So like I said, we're starting to see the impact of those tariffs. They're still starting to trickle down and move into the finance space. And then of course, $1,000 payments. Anyone bought a car in the past year? Anyone? A few? Okay, got a few in there. Anyone surprised at some of these figures? So if you look at the new car space on the loan side, we're almost 18% of new loan payments are over $1,000. So when you think, well, it's all luxury cars. No, it's not. So I started digging into this. I had a reporter ask me, they were like, well, what are these? It's pickup trucks. The number one vehicle with an over $1,000 payment is the F-150. So when you look at the $1,000 payments, it's a $73,000 loan. It's big trucks. It's 72 72-month loans, 6 and 7% interest rate, average payments about $1,300. My first mortgage was less than that. I mean, like that was way less than that. Of course, I'm also then very much aging myself. So they're out there, they're growing. Now, when we look at leasing, Honda, of course, continues to be the #1 leased vehicle out there. And then we've got some pretty significant increases in a few of the brands as far as their leasing. But those brands that have had the year-over-year increases, it's EV. It is EV pushing that. So most of the manufacturers, you can see they decrease leasing. VW Credit is still doing the leasing for VW, but their lease volume is significantly down. Tesla moved to #4. Last quarter, they were #3. So a lot of shifts in leasing. And then we look at what is being leased. So Q2 was really interesting. Normally, we've got 2 or 3 pickups that are in the top 10 leased vehicles. We didn't have that this time. We only have 1 truck. It was a Tacoma. #1 leased vehicle, Model 3. You got the Model Y. There's only 1 car in there, Civic. That's it. So payments, of course, when you look at leasing, about $137 difference on the new car side. It definitely dramatically varies based on the model. But again, the lease mix is really changing, and it's really being pushed because of the EV space. So a couple things that I don't usually do too much around demographics. But I started playing with some of our demographic data because we have all this data, so why not play around with it? So I started looking at household income. And so it's kind of hard to see the colors here. But the top bar are households that are making less than $50,000. And for the new car market, they went from 37% of new car buyers down to 30%. The only lines that's really growing, that navy one, that dark blue that's like 2 down, those are households over $200,000 household income. And they are now 18% of the market. So that is really the only area that we're really seeing a lot of growth is higher household incomes are increasingly representing a larger and larger portion of the market. And I apologize, that top line, that 30%, that's the 50 to 100. The pale pink, the 28 to 18, that's the under 50,000 household. But I actually kind of find it interesting that 200,000 and 50,000 are kind of the same share of the new car market. But 200,000, that is where we are increasingly growing that space of the market. So then we also started looking at generations. So, anytime you go to speak at a conference in the auto industry, usually it's like Gen X and older, because we've all been around forever. So I'm still thrilled to say that Gen X is the largest part of the automotive industry. We do represent about 30%, but look at the growth of millennials. So millennials increasingly becoming a larger part, Gen Z increasingly becoming a larger part of the market. They're now about 11%. So again, we still have, Gen X, largest buyers, millennials, right on the tail. And then again, the youngest generation increasingly representing a larger part. And this is just for the new car market. We'll look at this in the used car space. But of course, I hit the wrong button. Went the wrong way. So of course, the generations also purchase a little bit differently. So on the left-hand side, these are the transaction types by the generations, whether they're doing loans, leases, and again, just for the new car space. So when you look at this, the millennials do lease at the largest percentage. So millennials lease 25% of the time, baby boomers about 20, Gen X just around 23. And the right-hand side breaks up the transaction. So unknown is basically cash. So it's kind of not a surprise that it's the older generations bringing the most amount of cash. So Gen Z at the very top, you've got your silent generation at the bottom. And when you look at cash, baby boomers bring almost 40% of their purchases are cash. So again, you just have the very, very different purchase patterns based on what the generations are doing. So of course, the EV space. So this year, of course, people are asking me, what do you think is going to happen to EVs with the tax credits going away? So I think we're still going to see a lot of leasing. There's really strong days supply right now for EVs. So I think some of the manufacturers, we're still going to see a lot of incentives on these vehicles. I think VW on the ID4 was running like a crazy incentive recently to move those vehicles. But when the tax credit came about and the lessors could apply that tax credit and bring that payment down, that's when people were leasing EVs 60% of the time. But keep in mind, EVs are 20% of the lease market. And EVs get leased a little bit different. So most typical leases, in the new car space, it's all 36 month. With EVs, it's kind of equally split between 24 and 36. So when you think about the off-lease vehicles that are coming in, really starting towards the end of this year, 1 in 5 is going to be an EV. What are we going to do with these? I mean, the values have dropped so dramatically. I think this is probably one of the biggest concerns right now in the late model availability is going to be the sheer presence of EVs and how are they going to transact? Because no one's going to buy them out. I mean, no one's going to do the lease buyout because the values have dropped so tremendously. So right now, leasing has dropped a little bit. We're around 8%. Again, it's going to be very curious what's going to continue to happen. And of course, the buy rates and the way that people are transacting in EVs varies dramatically by the model. So number one EV model is the Model Y. I would have to tell you, I think almost every single Uber I've been in the past 5 or 6 weeks has been either a 3 or a Y. I do have to say, so it's not on the, does anyone have a Cybertruck? Oh my God, I'm so sorry. So there was one hand raiser on the Cybertruck. So I have to say, this is my most hated vehicle of all time. Okay. Last quarter, it was in the top 10 EVs. And unfortunately, so many people know I hate this that anytime they see one, they send me a text of the photo. So my text box is just full of Cybertrucks. Although they do have some pretty cool wraps on some of these things. But anyway, so the Cybertruck fell out of the top 10. The R1S came back into the top 10. But as you can see, the purchase patterns are so completely different based on what the EV is. The Model 3 last year was leased like 20% of the time. Now it's 60%. So some of these vehicles, again, you got the i4 from BMW. It's leased at almost 89% of the time. Some of the vehicles, again, you get a little bit more cash on like the Ioniq and the Model Y, but just huge lease rates. And what's interesting on the leasing of the EV space is the payment differences. And again, this is where I think when with the tax credit going away, I think we'll still see really heavy leasing on EVs. We won't see it to the same level as we're seeing today. Because overall, lease payments tend to be about $140 lower. But in the EV space, because of that tax credit, almost $200 lower in the EV side. And look at some of these payment differences. Again, you saw the average new payment, $750. But you could get into on a lease on like the Nissan, $329, the Model 3, under $400. And I heard that there were like programs going on in some counties here in San Diego and Orange County where you could get into a Model 3 for like $250. So just like these ridiculous payment differences. And I did the math on the right-hand side. Again, you can see that Aria, almost a $400 difference when it's a lease. So again, we still have some of the state credits that are coming into play. But again, I still think we're going to see some pretty heavy leasing still in the EV space. Okay, and then used EVs. Again, I mentioned 1 in 5 of the cars coming off of lease are going to be EVs. And right now on the used EV side, our volume has increased pretty dramatically. I mean, we're 44% up year over year. So far, just the first half of the year, we're at almost 300,000 used EVs. So they're coming. There's still a lot of Teslas. And what's interesting on the used EV, the number 2 lender on used EVs, Carvana. So Carvana is the number 1 retailer of used EVs. So they're certainly coming. So when we start looking at the used car market, again, this is where banks have still accelerated a little bit more. They've pulled out a little bit ahead of the credit unions, a little bit broader. The credit union share, you can see that, they hit that huge market share in 22. They got overweighted in auto. A lot of them pulled back. They're starting to focus again on the industry again. But again, banks really dominating as far as who the largest lenders are. But one of the larger increases also, kind of that third line down, finance companies. Finance companies are now one of the largest market shares that they've ever had. So if you think about, 1 in 5 loans on the used car side is written by a FinCo. So huge market share gains from them. Now, of course, the other thing that we're looking at in this space that I'm sure you guys are very well aware of, the average age of the vehicle that consumers are purchasing is getting older and older. So I know a lot of numbers on here. So essentially we have cash, financing, franchise, independent, grand total. So that's going to include all the private party. And on the right-hand side, regardless of how it's purchased, what is the average age and how has it changed from 2020 to 2025? At a franchise store, the average age of the used vehicle being sold is now a little over 5 years old. And again, this is also why we have kind of a record low of financing. This is also why some of the banks I've been talking with are starting to look at doing 10 to 13 to 15-year-old vehicles. A lot of them would do like current plus 8. Well, now they're looking older because they kind of have to, because this is where, again, we have the affordability issues. And when we look at the retail sales, so I grouped it, the left-hand side is 2020 compared to 2025, Q2 of each period. And the way it stacks up is new vehicles, then the next line down is your used up to 3, so your typical off-lease vehicle. Look at the reduction in that. 5 years ago, late model used vehicles were 16%. Now we're only 11%. So again, high demand late model used vehicles, and they're just not there. Then we have the 4 to 8-year-old vehicles, kind of consistent, but that bottom one, that's a 9+ model year vehicle. And it's 44% of what consumers are purchasing. And it's not just subprime consumers, because the right-hand side, break out the age groups. The top part is super prime, so it's super prime, prime, near prime, and then that bottom section is subprime, so 600 and below credit scores. Prime consumers are half of the people who are buying 9+ model year vehicles. And again, this is where the question came up about, hey, I had to keep my payment at $475. Well, that's kind of where you have to go to keep that payment around $475. And this is a lot of eye charts. I'm not going to spend too much time on here, but wanted to also see like what's going on in the used leasing space. So used leasing is a very small part of the lease market. You know, as you all know, it's like 3% of the lease space is used. And on the franchise side, so it's the top 20, first half of the year, leased models, then franchise, and then the independent stores. And on the franchise side, most of what I'm seeing for used leasing are dealer service cars. As you can see, it's Mercedes. It's all Mercedes, it's BMW. That's what we're seeing for most of the lease space. On the independent side, I found the Alfa Romeo to be very interesting. But then it's typically, you can kind of see where those price points are. It's consumers, again, kind of looking for some of the cars, some of the big trucks, and trying to keep those payments low. But when we do look at payments, like I said, most of the used lease that I'm seeing on the payment side, service cars, average lease payment in the $600 side on the used vehicle. But this is also where we're going to have the tariff impact, and it's going to spill over to the used car market very strongly. So right now, average used loan amount, almost $27,000. Last month, we hit over $27,000. Average used payment, $530. Actually, last month, it went up to $560. But that's the entire used market, franchise, independent, private party, everything. For franchise, the average used payment is actually quite a bit higher. It's in the $600 range, because again, it tends to be more of your late model CPO, you know, couple years. We are starting to see some of the rates come down, so that has been nice to see. We still have, you know, 72 is the most common term out there for both new and used. We have some specialty lenders entering the market and doing 120-month loans. They're out there. They are out there. Navy Federal Credit Union, #1 lender with 85+. Also Woodfield Credit, they're also way up there. It's kind of like a car mortgage. So it really is crazy. You're like, okay. Oh, and then so I've also been doing work on the refi space right now, and refi we've already refied the first half of this year $6 billion of automotive loans. The payment distributions, even on used, we've got about 5% of payments over $1,000. So they are, you know, certainly out there, certainly increasing. And the trend line on this is just absolutely ridiculous. I mean, it's gone from, you know, nothing to now 5%. And even on the independents, you know, about almost 3% are over $1,000. And again, it's big pickups. So again, when we start looking at the affordability issue, that whole question of, oh, I want a payment, $475. Well, to get a payment of, under 400 or around 400, you're in a 9-year-old vehicle. So this is just on the used car side. That light blue is a current +3. Then we got our 4 to 8, our 9+ model-year-old vehicles. And so that typical question that people are like, oh, I want to keep that payment under 400. You're a 9-year-old vehicle to do so. And of course, the terms do drop, the rates do increase. But again, I showed you earlier, half of these consumers are prime. So it's a prime consumer who's doing this. And this is where it gets really dramatic. So current +3, 4 to 8, 9+ payment. Look at the payment shift that we've gone through. The average consumer, from what we're looking at our data as we look at our registrations, of the average consumer who is coming back to market this year, their last purchase was 5 years ago. Now, I didn't put the new car payment on here, but 5 years ago, the new car payment was around $550. And now, as you saw, it's $750. A late model used, $614. We kind of hit a peak a couple years ago when the auction values were so high. But to keep it around 400, yeah, you're 9 years old. And we are well outpacing the rate of inflation on this one. So the only one that's actually under inflation is the 9+-year-old vehicle. The biggest one being hit here is the late model used. And you can see that huge price point when we had a 40% increase in just 1 year. And of course, it's going to continue to increase. The auction values are not going to go down because we've got limited supply of late model vehicles. So it's going to continue, and it's going to continue to get a little bit worse. Not that I want to be very positive on this message. So anyway, I try not to do doomsday, but that was a little doomsday. I apologize for that. And again, when we start looking at household income, again, the big growth is 200,000 plus. So in the used car space, the households that are over 200,000 are about 8% of the market. Still, the biggest market is the $500 to $1,000 household. It's around 34%, so a little over a third of the market is that 5 to 1,000. And again, when we start looking at generations and how are the generations transacting on the used car market, again, it's a lot of cash. And most of the cash comes in with the older generations, but still each generation is 60+ cash in the used car space. And on the right-hand side, again, we start looking at how they're transacting. When it comes to used leases, the sweet spot are millennials. Again, it's a small percentage, but that is who is leasing on the used car side. And again, it was the late model Mercedes and the BMWs coming off the service lanes. Then, of course, by age group, again, when we start on the left-hand side, 9+ vehicles, 9+ model year vehicles, 60% of what each generation is buying. And on the right-hand side, when we look at how they are transacting on that, again, it is millennials. Millennials and kind of Gen X are kind of duking it out all for these older vehicles. So increasingly representing a larger part of the market. And then by household income group, this is where, again, people are like, oh, it's only subprime. It's like lower income houses that are buying these older vehicles. And that's not the case. Like almost 50%, well, 48% of the vehicles that are 9+-year-old models are purchased by $200,000 household income. So again, this is a high demand vehicle across all household brackets, all incomes, and it's where we tend to see pretty much the largest growth, are consumers adding to their household with older vehicles. So kind of wrapping it up, and I might have time for a couple questions. So our balances, are out. When you start ranking where the automotive balances fall across country GDP, we have nearly $1.6 trillion in automotive balances that consumers hold in the US. That is a big figure. But the growth rate is really slowing down. I mean, actually, the amount of automotive loans is bigger than 2/3 of the countries out there GDP. So the growth rate slowed down. We only grew about 1.4% year over year. The area on the right-hand side, when we break it out across the different risk tiers, we are starting to see more increase in our subprime balances. But most of the automotive portfolio out there is very, very prime. It performs very well. But the unfortunate news is we do have a growth in subprime balances, and it's because of this. So our delinquency rates, probably the most important figure here is the lower right-hand side. Of that nearly $1.6 trillion in automotive balances, 0.83% of it is 60 days default. These will not, very few of these are going to cure. We are seeing an increased roll rate, so more loans that are at 60 are rolling into the next highest status. About a third of these will roll down to 30, but a third of them are going to roll up to the next status, which obviously is going to pretty much go straight to charge-off, repo, et cetera. Auction value is still being high, though, so that's the good, kind of like the only good news here. But we're still pretty much at our levels of delinquency that we had back in 2009. I think the only advantage here is no one's surprised by this. Most of the lenders I talk with are all like, hey, we're still doing pretty good. We're not seeing increases. We planned for it. It's not like 2009 when all of a sudden it was like, oh my God, they just came out of nowhere. So we're still managing this pretty well, but we're still at very high levels of delinquency. And the unfortunate part about this is a good third of that is fraud. So fraud, we actually just did a study and showed that $4 billion last year was fraud in the automotive space. We're anticipating right now we've got about $7.6 billion at risk, which a lot of that will eventually end up being fraud. We just think it's going there, but we just don't know it's going there quite yet. So fraud, that was actually one of the things that Sam Diark said from Ziegler. Their biggest issue right now, fraud.
What kind of fraud? Fraud?
All of it. First party, third party, income, misstepped income. Yeah, so it was pretty much like we did a survey actually of lenders, asking them about what kind of fraud they're seeing the most. Straw party was kind of like, no one really cares. That's fraud that pays, but it's like it's not really that person that's driving that vehicle, but they're paying. But it was first party. It was synthetic. It was all of it, and a lot of it literally just they're stealing the cars.
What was the increase, say, over the last 5 years of that?
So that one, I think I don't know how far back they went, but it basically doubled. Yeah, I think it was like, it went from like 2 million 5 years ago or 2 billion to 4 billion. This year we're probably going to hit 5 to 6 billion.
So that factors in a lot into the discussion, because if you look at that, you think the economy, the world is not doing as well, but there's a piece that has nothing to do with the state of the economy.
Yeah, and it's what's specifically interesting on this was out of that 4 billion on fraud, half of it was Florida. And particularly Miami-Dade. So yeah, Chicago's a big issue, Florida's a big issue. But about half of that was Florida. Yeah. Yeah, and Sam was funny because they have a Ferrari store. And I was like, do you see fraud differently across the different makes? And he's like, well, I can't specifically speak to Ferrari. Because I'm like, if I was going to steal a car, it would be a Ferrari. So, but yeah, it was, fraud, huge issue. So that's basically what I have. I think I took us right to time. Does anyone have any questions? All right, wonderful. Well, that's it for me. Wonderful, thank you.